Today, we're talking defending liberty in America at the Virginia Lobby Day gun rights rally. Peaceful, nonviolent, law abiding Americans from all walks of life showed up protecting their Second Amendment rights. Martin Luther King would have been proud of the estimated 22,000 people that rallied in Richmond on the holiday set aside to honor him. Contrast these words with the racist Democrat Governor Ralph Northam's words in the buildup to the rally. White supremacists, violent intent, extremists, the emergency declaration suspending gun rights at the Capitol. The contrast between a made-up emergency by government and reality couldn't be clearer. Stick with us. This is the Rob Maness Show. Americans, people who really believe in the values our great nation was founded on, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, come in all forms, shapes, sizes, colors, and yes, political perspectives. These are the Americans that showed up in Richmond, Virginia this week on Lobby Day, estimated at 22,000 of them to face down the known racist Democrat Governor Ralph Northam and his leftists in the state legislature threatening unconstitutional gun rights restrictions. Northam, known for his blackface and or Klansman yearbook photos and his defense of killing live birth babies after abortions, declared an emergency in the state capitol prior to the event. ABC News reported that Northam, quote, issued a state of emergency on Wednesday that bars any weapons from the Richmond's Capitol Square from Friday to Tuesday after he received credible intelligence that hate groups and armed militias are planning violence at next Monday's Lobby Day against gun control legislation. Northam, who discussed the threats at a news conference, said the state's law enforcement analysis found that the chatter on the internet and other venues mirrored similar messages seen around the time of the 2017 Charlottesville Unite the Right rally, which he said left 3 dead and more than 30 injured. The governor, however, declined to give exact details about the threats and the persons making them, but said that these groups, who were coming from outside the state, talked about storming the Virginia Capitol. There hasn't been a governor or political party more out of touch with citizens since racist George Wallace stood in the door of his state's university to prevent Black Americans from attending during the days of segregation. The new Democrat legislature in Virginia started something they never anticipated, a peaceful and strong defense of every American's civil right to bear arms by all of us. Heck, even the Black Panthers showed up. Martin Luther King would have been so proud of these men and women who want no violence, only for their rights to be left alone by government. This gathering made me proud to be an American and set an example for other citizens, such as zero violence, and they even picked up their trash. Contrast that to leftist demonstrators who routinely get away with violence, destruction of property, and always leave piles of trash, even at their climate change marches. The core of what is happening in Virginia around Second Amendment rights needs to happen with First Amendment and other constitutional rights because governments at all levels in this country are overreaching every day. Our guest today is Nick Freitas, who's a member of the Virginia House of Delegates representing District 30. He's also running for election to the U.S. House of Representatives to represent Virginia's 7th Congressional District and served in the United States Army, including 2 tours in Iraq. And welcome, my friend delegate from Virginia, Nick Freitas. We appreciate you coming on the Rob Maness Show to talk about this big rally that happened in Richmond this week.
No, I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, let's start off with how did we get there to that rally? I mean, 22,000 Americans showed up. The governor seemed all in a panic over potential violence the week prior and those kind of things. But I saw 22,000 Americans showing up and very peacefully and nice and all kinds of things. It was a great demonstration on Martin Luther King Day, quite frankly.
No, it was a great rally, and this is the impetus has been the fact that for several years Democrats in Virginia have told us that nobody wants to take your guns. And what we saw was at the moment they took power, taking our guns is exactly what they wanted to do. So whether it was bills like Senate Bill 16 or House Bill 961, these were direct confiscation bills. And so you started to see a movement all over the Commonwealth. It started with these 2A sanctuary rallies in individual counties and localities. And now over 100 of them have signed on to become 2A sanctuary localities. And this was their first opportunity to come down during lobby day and make their feelings be heard to the General Assembly. And like you said, what we saw were tens of thousands of citizens showing up, peacefully assembling for to petition their government for a redress of grievances. And despite all the ways that some people in the media and on the Democratic Party tried to caricature this movement, what we saw was a rally of all races, all creeds, to defend the rights of all races and all creeds here in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what's the status of the bills that generated all the fuss and the really resistance by normal everyday citizens in Virginia, which I think is a blessing because it's about time that normal Americans started standing up for our rights?
No, I agree. Senate Bill 16, thankfully, was actually struck by its own patron. But we have another version of the House Bill 961, which is still active. And then we have a number of other anti gun legislation that's going forward, whether it's one handgun a month or trying to make it to where it's harder to get a concealed carry permit. You have ones that would still criminalize people for owning an AR-15 or certain magazines. So across the board, red flag laws is still active, and red flag laws especially, a big part of the problem here is that when the press reports on these bills, they don't report on what the bill would actually do. They report the talking points of the patron. So it's all about the intentions behind the bill as opposed to what it would actually accomplish. And as people are becoming more and more aware of how these bills infringe not only on their Second Amendment rights, but on their Fourth Amendment rights, their Fifth Amendment rights, and potentially even their First Amendment rights, people are starting to become alerted to the problems with these bills.
Yeah, I noticed that people from all backgrounds showed up. I even saw a picture of a group of Black Panther guys and a young lady that was with them that showed up. Gay rights for gays for gun rights showed up. I was very pleased to see that because I think you're right, Nick. It's a civil rights issue. The gun rights thing is just one part of it. I'm hoping to see a massive wave continue across this country for people standing up for their rights. We're starting to hear some rumors coming out of the Richmond rally that there were some First Amendment rights violated pretty aggressively by law enforcement. Is that accurate?
I certainly didn't see anything like that. I think our Capitol Police, our state troopers, our Richmond Police, we even had Department of Corrections there. I didn't see any of that myself. Most of the people that I saw actually really appreciated how professional and polite all the law enforcement was. And I think it's important to understand something. When the Democrats first did the gun ban policy on the Capitol grounds, they tried to pass it off as if this was something that Capitol Police asked for. That was completely untrue. And I thought it was a demonstration of Democrats trying to shift blame onto law enforcement. And I know I went to a lot of trouble to try to make sure that everyone understood that that was not law enforcement policy. This was a Democrat policy. And that when people showed up to please, treat law enforcement with respect, they're there to protect everyone. And I think that's what you saw. And I saw protester after protester shaking hands with law enforcement, thanking them for their professionalism. And so I haven't seen that, but certainly if there's evidence of that, I would want to, because it would need to be something that we address. But overall, again, I'm just so proud that what you saw happen all over the Commonwealth of Virginia at all these local rallies happened again in Richmond. And it's just further demonstration that Second Amendment rights advocates are not people to be feared. They're not people to be caricatured. And unfortunately, we have too many Democrats that were doing just that. And I think these citizens that showed up demonstrated that they don't fit into this caricature or this name calling that a lot of people want to put them into.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see the pushback coming out of the state of Virginia, which is really the birthplace of a lot of things in our Constitution and great thinkers on natural rights. I've heard many of your speeches on the floor of the House of Delegates about rights, especially the Second Amendment right. But do you think your governor was just a little bit disingenuous by trying to claim he had intelligence that showed a credible threat? I didn't see anything. Did he ever release any factual information on that?
He didn't. I mean, I will say that, some of us were also privy to some of the briefings that got the security briefings, and they did have some concerns about groups coming in. What was fascinating is that their concerns were not about Second Amendment rights advocates. It was actually about other groups that would have potentially come in and tried to hijack this rally for their own purposes. And what we saw is they didn't do that. They weren't able to do that. And so, I think the tone that the governor struck was problematic because he wasn't just saying that there's credible threats or people that could come in and hijack this. He was trying to make it into another Charlottesville scenario, or he was trying to make it into a scenario where anybody that was showing up was a potential threat or potentially a part of one of these outside groups that had nothing to do with the Second Amendment. And I think a lot of citizens are getting tired of being branded with again, these ad hominem attacks coming from the administration and other Democrat policymakers. And again, the best way to prove them wrong is to show up, peacefully assemble, show up with, again, both peacefully, professionally, and with resolve. And that's what they did. And so nobody's going to be allowed to take the narrative away from good citizens who showed up to, again, protest the usurpation of their rights.
Yeah, I think it's very unfortunate that the governor tried to characterize these good folks as extremists, white supremacists, all the usual, and then of course the crazy corporate media tries to pick up on that because I don't know what their intentions are, but they sure seem to get it wrong a lot, and they did this time for sure. What was really fascinating, though, is how even the protesters picked up their trash. There was no burning cars like we've seen in Washington, D.C. at the president's inauguration. There was no glass breaking. They didn't trash the entire place and then leave it like we've seen at the women's marches and climate change marches and those kind of things, which is very, very heartwarming. But what's most interesting to me is, and what do you think about this, is that this looks like a bow wave, the beginning of a bow wave. And I'm encouraging it because I believe, like Martin Luther King did, that resolve, nonviolence, and facing down those that try to do harm to our rights and those that want to hurt our society is the best way to achieve what our goals are, which is a protection of our rights and not the restrictions on them. And that's exactly how we rid the country of mass legalized racism, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it was really frustrating to see today on the floor of the House of Delegates where one delegate got up and suggested that the people that showed up yesterday were bullies and agitators and that they had a mandate to push all this anti-gun legislation. But you know what? I'm sorry, we shouldn't be surprised. This wouldn't be the first time that Democrats have tried to characterize citizens as bullies and agitators, not because they were bullying anyone, not because they were agitating, but simply because they disagreed with Democrat policies. And I think we also need to understand, because he was also trying to suggest that people had inappropriately done this on Martin Luther King Day. Martin Luther King applied for a concealed carry permit and had a hard time getting it in Alabama because it was a Jim Crow state where they were deliberately trying to suppress people's Second Amendment rights because they didn't want Black Americans to be able to defend themselves. And that's abhorrent. And like you said earlier, this isn't just a gun issue. This is a civil rights issue. And I think as you look at civil rights activists, whether it was Martin Luther King or Frederick Douglass, one of my favorite quotes from Frederick Douglass is, "There's three boxes that secure our liberties: the ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box." So I think Martin Luther King would have been proud of the fact that there was tens of thousands of citizens showing up and peacefully protesting. And again, petitioning the government for a redress of grievances, right? Exercising their First Amendment rights and doing it boldly and unapologetically, but again, peaceably. So we need to continue to do this. And this isn't something that stops at Monday's rally that we just had. This is something that has to continue going forward because, again, it's not just an assault on our Second Amendment rights. As we see what some of this legislation would do, it is an assault on the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, due process of law. And this is not the sort of control or authority that we want to be arbitrarily handing over to our government, because we've seen in the past, not just in other countries, but even in our country, what happens when you allow the government to not only oppress people, but summarily disarm them at the same time.
Well, the great people of Virginia have set a fine example for the rest of us here in the United States, and I hope we see it by the tens of thousands. And I think you're right, Mr. King. Dr. King would have been proud of you all yesterday. I am very proud that this occurred. But, you know, and this happened at the right level, at the local level. But, Nick, you're running for Congress against Abigail Spanberger, an impeachment never trumping person that won by the skin of her teeth in that district last time. Tell us about your race real quick and how people can help you.
Well, it's been great. The outpouring of support that we've had so far has been wonderful, from Club for Growth, Freedom Works, Rand Paul, Mike Lee, Ted Cruz, Ben Klein. I mean, again, the support has been very overwhelming. But yes, Abigail Spanberger barely beat Dave Bratt, who was a great congressman. She beat him on a blue wave year election where they were, attempting to classify themselves as moderates and just wanting to work across the aisle. Or as Abigail likes to say, she's just going there to solve problems. And the issue with that is, everybody wants to solve problems. The question is, how do you do it? And what Abigail has proven by voting with Nancy Pelosi 90+% of the time and voting with AOC 89% of the time is that the way that Abigail wants to solve problems is by giving the government more authority at the expense of your freedoms. And the way that I want to solve problems is by keeping the government within its proper constitutional boundaries, protecting your liberty, protecting your property rights, but otherwise leaving you free to live your own life. Because one thing that I think we have learned by watching and comparing free societies with more authoritarian societies is when you allow free people to work together in voluntary cooperation to solve problems, they're able to accomplish so much more than some bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. And so that really is the primary difference between myself and Abigail Spanberger is I want to maximize individual liberty, protect your property rights, and let you be free to solve problems within your community, within your state, without having to constantly look over your shoulder for the next tax, rule, mandate, or fee emanating down from Washington, D.C. by people that really have just become this kind of political elite that think they're better than the rest of us or made from finer clay. So that's really what this race is ultimately about. Do we want to put our faith in free people, or do we want to put in our faith in the bureaucracy of Washington, D.C.? And I choose free people.
And so do I, my friend. So do I. What's your website so people can donate to your campaign?
So if they want to go to nickforva.com, that's NICKFORVA.com. Also, please follow us on Facebook and Twitter. What I like to tell people is a lot of times most media outlets don't give conservatives a very fair shake. And so social media is one of the ways that we can actually connect with people and go around the media to get our message out there without the sometimes the biased filtration of the mainstream press. And so I would ask people to please check out our website, again, nickforva.com. Follow us on Facebook. We'll be regularly updating people both on the campaign and also what's going on in Virginia right now.
Well, thank you very much, sir. And I just want to tell my audience that I am putting my personal endorsement behind Nick Freitas for U.S. Congress. We need liberty protecting war veterans who understand what it means to do the right thing at the national government level and let the people do the right thing at all other levels of government. So, Nick, thank you very much for joining us today, and have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Well, we'd like to thank Virginia Delegate Freitas for joining us today to discuss this very important challenge to Second Amendment rights. And don't forget, folks, we need to challenge all restrictions on all of our rights that governments at every level attempt to make. I'll see you next week on The Rob Maness Show.